Welcome to the Crafting Character Podcast. Steve Carter here, and in association with my good friends at Preaching Today, the Ascent Leader, and Food for the Hungry, I bring you a conversation with 10th Church Senior Pastor Ken Shigematsu. He's a pastor. He is a thought leader. He is the author of The Survival Guide for the Soul, which is just an amazing, amazing book. But what I really, really appreciate about Pastor Ken is just his heart, his ability to listen, his desire to actually ensure that the text comes alive. And the way that he gets at that and does that is through sitting with people who think differently, running his manuscript and his ideas with people who might not appreciate what he has to say. He's a pastor in a large, very ethnically diverse city, Vancouver, and he's just incredible. And like we often do when we have a pastor, preacher, we give you a chance to listen and hear their sound and then begin to unpack that. So hear a recent message from Ken Shigematsu from 10th Church in Vancouver, Canada.
We're not all the same, but as Eugene Peterson puts it in his paraphrased translation of verse 11, from now on, everyone is defined by Christ. Everyone is included in Christ. And again, it's not saying that there are no differences, but those differences don't really matter anymore because we recognize if we're in Christ, we have a common creator and that we are all loved by Christ, and that connects us. There's some fascinating research that shows that if I present a photograph to you, but you can't relate to the person in the photograph, the brain scan will show that the compassion circuits just behind your forehead don't light up. But if I simply add a sentence or two that explains that this person has a common upbringing as you do, or a common educational background, or a common faith, then the scan will show that your compassion circuits just light up. It's amazing. It's amazing. And when we recognize, as we are joined to Christ, that we are connected to other people in the world, every other person, through a common creator, that we are loved by Christ, but that person is also loved by Christ, we'll realize that we're not just a me, but to use Dan Siegel's expression, we are also a we, M-W-E. We're connected, and that helps us wear the clothes of Christ's love.
Well, you just heard a clip from Pastor Ken Shigematsu from 10th Church in Vancouver, Canada. And I'm so excited to have this chance to learn from someone who, a dear friend of mine, Andrew Finch, told me is one of his favorite pastors, leaders, and communicators. And it was such high praise that I just immediately went and started to listen to this man. And it wrong. This just from listening to these messages, I have seen a level of thoughtfulness, a level of care, this kind of preparation that just seems not just intuitive, but both intentional as well. And so, Pastor Ken Shigematsu, thank you for joining us on the Crafting Character podcast. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's an honor to join you in this conversation. I'm glad to be able to connect with you.
Yeah, well, we just heard this clip of yours from a recent teach that you did called Clothed in Love. Can you give us a little background on the series and then also what you were trying and hoping to do in the teach?
Yeah, the background for the series was wanting to encourage people to live into their new creation, which, as you know, Colossians emphasizes, Paul teaches on beautifully and powerfully. And so one of the images that I've been offering is that if you join your life to Christ, you are the caterpillar that experiences chrysalis and then morphs into a butterfly. And so my colleagues and I have been encouraging folks in our community to live into their new creation, to live into their new capabilities thanks to Christ's transforming work in them. And so this was a message that encouraged them to live into the new love that they've not only received, but have to offer to others.
It's so beautiful. It's such a deep teach. And that's one of the things I really respect. When I can feel the thoughtfulness of a pastor, it just communicates so much to me. Because there's thoughtfulness in the way sentences are structured. There's thoughtfulness in theology. There's thoughtfulness in the care. There's thoughtfulness in the challenge. There's thoughtfulness in casting a vision for what this new life, this resurrected life can look like. I'm curious, because you've been pastoring. How many years have you been pastoring, preaching for?
So I've been pastoring and preaching for about 25, 26 years, depending on how you count it. But yeah.
Is that something that's always been true to your makeup? Or has this been something that you've kind of in the 25, 26 years of preaching and teaching where there's almost been a morphing, a chrysalis of itself when it comes to the ideas of truly pastoring and caring and leading and preaching in the way that you do and the beautiful sound that God has given to you?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think in my early years of pastoring, I had a love-hate relationship with preaching, especially the prep part. And so I came to a church here in the heart of urban Vancouver, Canada, that had cycled through 20 pastors in 20 years, had gone from over 1,000 at one point in the 1950s to 100 and something. And on one of my first days here, the secretary walked into my office and said, "Ken, if the ship sinks now, everyone will blame you because you were the last captain at the helm." And I think she was trying to motivate me to work harder, but I just felt depressed, and I felt a great weight on my shoulders. And given the fact that I'm kind of an achiever by temperament, I'm Japanese by origin, I think I've always been conscientious, but prepping sermons early on in my time here as a pastor was really stressful. There was a time we launched an evening service in addition to the morning service. And so on Thursdays, the Thursday before the Sunday, in the morning, I would prepare my morning message. And then in the afternoon, I would try to prepare the evening message, which was usually pretty bad. And then in the evening, I would try to put together a study guide for the messages. And Thursday was the worst and most anxiety-provoking day of my week. I went to a seminary just north of Boston called Gordon Conwell. Some of your friends and the guests on this podcast will be familiar with that school. And years after graduating, I went back to the school, and I happened to run into my former preaching professor, Haddon Robinson, who has had a role in preaching today. And I said, "Haddon, what are you learning about preaching these days?" And Haddon said, "Well, I've recently learned that our creative cycle occurs over a 10-day window. And so if you want to preach your best sermons, begin your prep process at least 10 days before you preach." And so I shifted. I went from doing all of my prep for 2 sermons on one Thursday, 3 days before the Sunday, to preparing 10 days in advance. And I didn't put in any more time, I don't think, or not much more time. I had a kind of every other day being in the text or, going to a commentary, doing an outline. But it took a lot of the pressure out of the preparation. And it enabled me to approach it more prayerfully, to ask the question, what is the text actually saying? And then on another day asking, how can this apply to the lives of people in our community? And then perhaps most, or as important as anything else, it gave me the opportunity to pray through the message and ask, how am I living it? Is this true of me? And hopefully be able to preach it from a place of greater integration.
I love that last phrase you just said, greater integration, and the space of 10 days. I think that is brilliant. And I mean, what Haddon Robinson did for the pulpit, for preachers. I had a few times of interaction with him, and one in Grand Rapids when he came and spoke at a local seminary. And man, the wisdom of that man. I'm just profoundly grateful. And but it's kind of like when you buy a new car and you think you're the only one that has it. But now that you have this new car, you're driving around, you're like, oh, there's another white Toyota Tacoma. There's another, white Ford. There's another, you start to see it. But when you have 10 days to live in this text, and you can go, oh, when you think about clothed in love, and you have 10 days to go, man, that was a moment where somebody on staff or someone in my neighborhood wasn't clothed in love, or was this beautiful chrysalis embodiment of greater integration of resurrection power and resurrection life. So that time, how did that work early on when you started to kind of make that shift? If you can go back and remember, because I think a lot of preachers begin their prep the week of, and some of them live by the deadline of the bulletin, on a Wednesday or Thursday, but some just find themselves wanting to create space. One, what was that like early on? And then how did you fight to maintain the space instead of just letting 10 days become 7 days, become 4 days, and then get yourself back into the old pattern of preaching?
Yeah, part of what helped me stick with this pattern, and in fact, I have a somewhat longer runway now, is that my colleagues in the worship and design teams felt that it was really helpful for their preparation. And so, again, I don't know if it's because of my Japanese origin, but I want to be a good team player and want to be aware of how my actions or inactions are impacting the team. So that's certainly a motivation. But another more intrinsic motivation came from the fact that I found that with a longer runway, I was actually enjoying the process more. I think that when I was prepping the messages on Thursday, I felt a desperate need to go to the text and come up with some kind of interesting message, maybe force the meaning, to insert something that I'd just been thinking about, or some great story that I had heard. And so the longer runway enables me to actually enjoy the process. And I think that's reflected eventually in the writing of the sermon and the preach itself. So my wife is originally from Tokyo, and she was the editor of a news magazine there, and then worked in publishing. And as I was writing my first book, God in My Everything, I felt awful about the early drafts. I was kind of feeling, I don't know if I want sort of the world to see this. And it was sort of depressing. And my wife, Sakiko, who had worked as an editor, said that if you feel anxious as you're writing, your readers will feel that when they read it. And she said, you've got a daytime job, so you're not under pressure to write to make a living. So she encouraged me to just, take my time to enjoy the writing. And if that were to happen, she felt that the readers would find my writing easier to read. And I think the same is true of preaching, that I think if we're enjoying the process and feeling that God is with us, and that we're not so anxious that we're just in constant rumination mode, that when we actually preach it, there'll be a sense of relaxed receptivity among people in our communities.
That is a brilliant insight, especially when you think about the writing, but how that translates to the stage and the pulpit. If there is anxiety in the writing, how that can obviously be felt in the subconscious. I'm going to sit on that. That is a brilliant bride that God has given to you. I'm curious because a couple things. You mentioned this like prayerful, that space to be prayerful. I'm always curious how pastors kind of use that longer runway to pray over the message. Sometimes you can, when you're running late, you're almost due 95% of the work, and you pray that God would bless the last 5%. But when you have a longer runway, what does that look like for you, Pastor Ken, just in the prayerful prep leading into a teach?
Yeah, so part of what that means is if I'm not having to, write the last part of the sermon, late Saturday night, it means that there actually is some space Saturday night. I'm basically prepared. And I can go for a walk through our neighborhood with our golden retriever, Sasha. I can sit in a time of silent centering prayer, and I might recollect some of the major movements of the sermon. But at that point, my mind isn't preoccupied with framing the last couple of paragraphs. It's more of a posture of receptivity, and sometimes I'll pray Psalm 139, search me, O Lord, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me or in this message, and lead me in the way everlasting. And so it feels like more of a posture of, Lord, if you want to redirect me, this would be a good time to do it, before preaching as opposed to after, although I've had some of that too, after the fact with some regret. But yeah, I feel like it provides a space where, if I'm feeling anxious, maybe I'm in a new setting, I can pray, Lord, we're in this together, and it will either succeed or fail together. And so, it enables me, I think, to focus more on the Lord and what God might be doing inside me, as opposed to just the words of the text.
So that's so beautiful. A couple other things you just mentioned earlier in the podcast, and you referenced your heritage, and kind of used, and maybe it's because of my Japanese heritage. I'm curious, what other insights, for better or for worse, that when you think about your Japanese heritage, has helped you when it comes to preaching, and helped you come to look at the text in preparation? And then what are the other ones? You kind of mentioned like achievement, it's just, maybe it's almost in a sense of blessing and curse, but is there others that you said, hey, this is some of the pieces from my tradition that might be just fascinating for our listeners to hear from a different context of the blessings of what it was like to kind of bring your culture to the forefront when it comes to preaching?
Yeah, thanks, Steve, so much for asking that. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question, but I appreciate your tapping into that. Japan is, as you know from your own experience, Steve, is a culture that's been very much influenced by Confucius values, which in shorthand means that Japanese people tend to care a lot about how their actions or inactions will affect their families, bring shame to their families. They're also concerned about what they say and how they say it might impact the feelings of people at their school, a company, or community. And so as preachers, we're called to sometimes preach on painful prophetic issues. And so last fall, we had a series on racism for 4 weeks. I've spoken on God's love for the unborn and addressed the question of abortion. But when I preached that message, I knew that there would be many people in the community that have had abortions. And Vancouver is a very secular city. We tend to tip toward people as a church that are not churched and that are not necessarily socialized in a Christian context. And so before preaching that message on God's love for the unborn, I vetted my sermon manuscript before 6 people who were either not Christians or liberal feminists, or certainly pro-choice. And I listened to the feedback, and I didn't change everything by any means. I maintained my core convictions, but I wanted to convey things in a way that would honor how they would experience it without compromising the truth. And I think as a Japanese person, I am somewhat tuned in, probably largely unconsciously, to how other people are feeling, and that can be a help. That can also be a hindrance as well at times. Yeah, if I acquiesce to being too much of a people pleaser.
Well, I love that just the bringing in people who might disagree, to kind of see the notes, to see where you're heading, to feel your heart, and then to hear that feedback. I've been watching this documentary on Theodore Roosevelt at the History Channel, and one of the things that he did often was that. And I realized, like, man, that is a lost art. It's easier just to be like, this is what I think, I don't care, or this is what I want to put out on Twitter, I don't care. But again, that I keep using this word thoughtfulness about you. That thoughtfulness to be able to go in there and to really be able to be integrated with and aware of your core convictions, but also be able to live with how somebody else might receive it. I think that is what makes your preaching so special, though, because when you can really live with an ability to go, not just what do I want them to know, but how do I almost like a good shepherd care for them to lead them towards real living water? Is there a moment maybe like in a message recently where you thought, man, because I want to like press in on this, because this, just with the way you said that, I'm like, this is one of the elements that makes you special as a writer, as a preacher, as a communicator, as a leader, as a pastor. But is there like one of those moments where you're like, man, this is what I want to say, but then maybe a couple questions came to mind to go, hey, blank, blank, blank. I don't know what those questions are, but do you have questions that you run that through to help you just remember? Because you have 5 locations, in a very diverse city, Vancouver, that just to make you not just think from your vantage point, your perspective, but to be aware of greater Vancouver.
Yeah, there are a couple of things I do, but in terms of, in the moment, I will have prepared. Last Sunday, I spoke from Colossians on the theme of living and working before the face of God. And I wanted to convey the idea that, no matter what our work, even if it's not particularly glamorous or highly paid or prestigious, that it matters to God. And at one of the services, I looked out of the corner of my eye and I saw someone who I know in the community who lost his job during the pandemic. He was designing stages for rock concerts and the like. And when that all dried up, he ended up working on construction sites. He's been having some problems with his back. And so without pointing him out, he was in my mind. And I talked about how Jesus was a day laborer. The word tekton can be translated carpenter or day laborer, and that he worked with his hands, and that was a noble work. And I mentioned that in the 2nd century, the well-known scholar Justin Martyr, who grew up just over the hills in Galilee where Jesus was raised in the 2nd century, said that the plows and the yokes that Joseph, Jesus's earthly father, and Jesus made were still being used. And so Jesus built yokes and plows that were built to last. And when we use our hands to build something that honors God, that really is noble and that matters. And so I sort of shifted in the moment. But I also do something that will help me perhaps anticipate how my words will land with the community, and my colleagues do the same. When I first came to 10th, this would have been back in 1996, my predecessor had some teenage kids, and after the Sunday service, I heard that they would basically have the pastor, their father, for lunch, so to speak. It would be like roast our dad, and they would offer all kinds of creative critiques. And I thought that it would have been really helpful for him to hear those critiques before he preached. And so several days before anyone here preaches on our staff, including me, we'll vet our message past some colleagues, sometimes past a layperson. We always want a woman in the room for sure, and some different perspectives. And so we'll run our ideas or our sermon past folks, and people can say, well, I think a part of our community would respond this way if you said that, or if you said it like this, I think there would be more receptivity. And so that also helps.
That's so good. I again, anytime you can get people to hear it, who can actually say what they think in the room before you go on stage. I mean, the heart of the word prepare means before you go public, and so to have that, I think, is a gift. And it's really beautiful going on 10th's website, 10th.ca. Obviously, you're in Vancouver, Canada. That's why the .ca, but made up of 5 locations on 10th Avenue. But I love your teaching team. I love being able to see that the ways that you have cultivated this team of really incredible preachers, but the sound, they're very different communicators but you seem to have a sense of values that kind of hold you and anchor you all together. Is that codified? Is there a document that says, hey, here are the 5 values we want from every one of our preachers, or here's the sound of, 10th Ave Church? Like, do you have that?
Like most churches, we have vision and value statements, but we also have a document. It's not publicly available because it's probably not of public interest, but we have a document called 10th Speak that we'll often share with our guest speakers. And so maybe some of these things are pretty obvious, but we'll ask people, if they use theological terms or jargon to explain it, again, because it's a secular city, we're drawing people from backgrounds that are not especially Christian. We'll ask people not to say disparaging words about people on the LGBTQ2S spectrum, things along those lines. Not to, again, we believe in the uniqueness of Christ, but not to launch a frontal attack on another religion, things along those lines. So so we've got something called 10th Speak, and
I love that. Well, the other piece I am fascinated by you is you wrote a book. I want to say, was it 2018? Mm-hmm. And I came across it in 2018. Personally, was probably one of the hardest years of my life. And it was titled so beautifully, A Survival Guide for the Soul. And it was words that I even just in the subtitle alone, a flourishing spirituality. And when you almost feel like you're limping to the desert, and your first chapter, if I remember right, is all on the divided self, and you're unpacking this whole self, and I just began to almost lap it up, like just drink up the depth of that. You mentioned you're an achiever. I'm an achiever. Talk about maybe the heartbeat of this, because it's in my opinion, I think that there is probably 50 books that are probably mandatory reads for preachers. And I think this is one of those books that needs to be read, because every pastor, every preacher is, going to go through a dark night of the soul. And I think what you articulate so beautifully is what are the practices? What are the ways that we can walk and not preach from a divided self, but actually live from a whole self? Talk about this book and what it meant to you and what it came out of.
Yeah, again, Steve, I think it came out in part of my own heritage. I was born in Japan, but raised mostly here in North America. And sometimes when I'm back in Japan, and I'm typically back there each year, I'll think to myself, thank God that I didn't experience the pressure of this country, of Japan, to get into the right kindergarten and the right high school. There are exams for kindergarten, high school, and so on. But if I'm honest with myself, I still feel the pressure to achieve. I felt it back in my sports playing days. I felt it when I worked in the corporate world for a brief time. And as our pastor friends and listeners will know, I still feel it. We still feel it as pastors. And we talk about, defining our life, not by what we achieve, what we do, how well we do it, what we have, how we're perceived by others, but invariably we tend to default to that mode. And so I wrote this book as a kind of personal exploration of the practices that can awaken us to a deeper sense that we really are, a deeper experiential sense that we really are cherished by God, so that our service comes not out of a need to be approved by God or others, but out of a deep place of gratitude that comes from knowing that we're already accepted, we're already received, and then to make the offering from there. I feel that's a better, freer, more joyful place from which to live.
Oh man. Well, and talk about those practices. Were there a couple for you that have been, because again, most of us who are preachers are achievers. Most of us are driven because there's a holy urgency to reach our friends who are far from God. There's a deep desire and beauty to see people not just know information, but actually step in formation of Christ and be formed in the way and likeness of Christ. We have that, but also there's those dark sides. What were a couple practices for you that helped you not go off the rails? You know, if you think of like a lattice so that a vine can actually grow well. That's kind of the heartbeat of the rule of life, was that kind of picture. What for you were some practices that, man, just you, as you were writing this, were like, that was really helpful then and have been helpful now? Or maybe with these two practices were helpful then, but these are the two new ones that have been really helpful in this season of COVID and post-COVID reality.
Yeah, one of the practices that has been really life-giving during COVID, but also before, has been silent centering prayer or meditation. There have been times when I've woken up during COVID and I've realized that someone in our community has lost their job, or a beloved parent to COVID. And I felt a lot of weight on my shoulders, anxiety, sometimes a feeling of depression. And so I'll typically begin my morning with a run with our golden retriever in a nearby park, or a swim, as I did this morning. And then I'll simply take some time to sit and breathe deeply. I'll light a candle. I'll open up a free app called Centering Prayer, created by the late Father Thomas Keating, a Trappist monk. And there's a chime that makes me think I'm in a monastery being summoned to pray by a bell. And so because I can set a timer to say 15 or 20 minutes, I'm not thinking, oh, how much time has gone by? And I simply take some time to sit and breathe deeply in through my nose, exhale slowly. Breathe in through my nose, exhale slowly. If my mind is wandering, I'll often take a brief passage of scripture like Psalm 46 and just repeat that. Be still and know that God is God. Breathe in deeply. Be still and know that God is God. And it's very simple, but it stills my mind. And when the 15 or 20 minutes are done, time sounds, I open my eyes, and I know this sounds very subjective, but I tend to feel a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more centered, a little bit more at peace throughout the day. And I always feel uplifted. I don't always feel like I'm top of the world, but I always feel a greater sense of joy. And I was sharing this with someone just the other day. Years ago, I was dating someone. We didn't end up getting married. I was in my 20s, and she introduced me to a friend of hers. And this friend said something along the line. She wasn't religious, but I think she knew that I was hoping to become a pastor one day. And she said, I feel like you're at the next activity, that you're not really here, but you're somewhere in the future. And it was sort of offensive and painful. And so, I remember it to this day. But I noticed that lately, including my wife, has said that you tend to be, I know that you're restless by nature, but you seem to be more present, more in the room. And I think that this is largely the result of this silent meditation, to be present to life and less inclined to either be living in the future or ruminating regretfully about something in the past. So that's one practice. And then another, Steve, and I think this helps to mitigate my tendency. I would say, yes, God is first, my marriage second, family third, and friends fourth, work fifth, or whatever. But in terms of the actual operationalization of my life, I tend to prioritize work in my calendar because that's measurable. I've got a benchmark, it releases dopamine when I accomplish something, check something off. So Sabbath, which ideally is a 24-hour period of time when we don't work and don't do anything related to our work, not only opens us up to a life of greater joy and being alive, to experience what Joshua Heschel, the great Jewish theologian, described as a palace in time, but it also can free me from the potential idolatry of relying too much on preparation. And so I'm not a particularly detail-oriented person. And so some years ago, I was asked to speak at a General Assembly for the Pentecostal Church of Canada in Saskatchewan, right in the breadbasket of our country. And I didn't realize up until like a couple of days before that I was supposed to give not just one keynote address, but two presentations. And the other one had to be sort of an original talk. And I realized that the only day I had to prepare was on my Sabbath. But I sensed an invitation just to trust God. Now, if you're Pentecostal, you're saying, what's the problem? Because, apparently if you're Pentecostal, you just stand up, the Spirit falls on you, boom, you've got an oracle. But I'm not that anointed, unfortunately. I generally need to prepare, but I didn't prepare much. I had a little outline and God was faithful. And so I think Sabbath opens the doorway to embracing the gift of life, but also to trust God, because there's always... it's always going to be the case that it seems as though there's more work that we can do in 5 or 6 days. So
that's so good. I mean, for any of us that are achievers or, driven by ambition or constantly struggling to live in the present, Sabbath, silence, solitude, centering prayer, as you described, those are profound anchors to ground us in the here and now. And I love that Sabbath just has this ability to kind of allow you to delight in God's goodness, and almost like a wedding ring where you just you look back and you just remember that special day. You remember the vows. You remember you just remember. And for me, it's that delight. It's that moment to just remember, like, oh yeah, God's got this. It's not on me. It's like God's got this, and there is something that just slows you down. You've been doing this 25, 26 years, and you've probably seen just moments of sheer delight in the kingdom of God. Moments where you've just seen the church just thrive and flourish. And then, you've probably seen some seasons where the church hasn't been at its best. And I don't mean 10th. I mean the church, universal C, big C church. And yet it feels like more and more leaders are struggling to finish well. It seems like the character piece is catching up. And there's a lot to say about Twitter, but I feel like Twitter is a place that everything will be brought into the light, unfortunately and fortunately. I'm curious for you, as someone who's been doing this for so many years. I live with this mantra every time I walk back to my car in the parking lot of a church, no matter where I'm preaching at. I just have this short little breath prayer. I'm one weekend closer to finishing well. Mm-hmm. One weekend closer to finishing well. But try to stay humble in that, and also remind myself that the goal is to finish well. What does that look like for you as someone who's been, at this and doing this faithfully, and none of us doing it perfectly, obviously, but just in the faithful steadfastness? Any insight? Because there's a lot of people who listen to this who are in their 20s and 30s. A lot of people listen in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. What words, sage words? I'm putting that word onto you because I just think you're so thoughtful and wise. But would you say around character and around integrity and greater integration, so that we can be people who are clothed in love, live with that resurrection power, and finish the race well?
Yeah, as I indicated earlier in our conversation, Steve, in my first days and months and probably years here, I was frenetically trying to keep the ship afloat. That wasn't my job, but I was taking on a burden that wasn't mine. And for whatever reason, in the years that have followed, I have come to believe that the greatest gift, and I just came through a 360 evaluation facilitated by my board, which they do every year. Every year around this time, I say I will volunteer my resignation if the board feels that's in the best interest of the church. So I want to be open-handed. And the chairman of the board, as we were debriefing the evaluation, said to me in this space that I'm doing this call from, said the greatest gift that you bring the church is the person that you are becoming. And I really feel, like you, like other pastors, I'm sometimes asked the question, what's the most important part of my job? Is it vision casting? Is it preaching? Is it leadership development? All those things are important, but his words meant a lot, because I find myself saying that the most important part of my job is to grow into a person more like Christ. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it comes from a place deep within me. And then, Steve, I have found that something called the welcoming prayer that was first introduced by a woman named Mary Murkowski, this one, is something I pray several times a day because I need to be freed of my idolatries. And so I was praying this earlier today, actually in the pool of all places. Lord, I consent to the work of the Holy Spirit in my life, and I let go of my desire for affection and esteem. I let go of my desire for power and control, and I let go of my desire for security and survival. And so I think that prayer that's inspired out of Jesus' temptations in the wilderness is one that has been good for my soul. And so I recommend that. It's called the Welcoming Prayer. You can find it online.
That prayer is how I start most of my mornings. It's welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yeah, and I saw you. People won't catch this in just the audio, but as I mentioned welcoming prayer, Steve was giving a big fist pump.
Well, and maybe because you quoted this second or third paragraph of it, but let me just read all of this, because I think it's something that I love these little surprises. I feel there are moments where I learn something new. And I've already been taking notes as you talk, because there's been things that you said that I've never thought about. And then there's some moments of solidarity, in the sense of, oh man, a friend in Vancouver who is probably going through a lot of pain because the Canucks can't ever seem to win.
I'm sometimes asked to pray for the Canucks exactly. On those rare years that they make it into playoffs. I mean, I'm serious. They'll contact me and say,
but these moments of just, solidarity of like, that's awesome that in a pool today, you were saying this, and on a walk today, I was saying the same words, and, but before I say that, I just got a little emotional just thinking about your elder, your board chair, just saying the greatest gift that you offer this place is the person that you are becoming, the pastor that you're becoming, that gift of imitate me as I imitate Christ. But just, man, that's what deep words, Paul writes to Timothy in the first letter, and just says, let everyone see your progress. Like that your chick can see the work that you've been doing, and how centering prayer, silence of solitude, or just the ways that you're stepping more fully into yourself. So that's such a gift, and just I love that you shared that story. Thank you for that. But let me just read this welcoming prayer, because maybe it might be beneficial for many of you. It says this: welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me in this moment, because I know it is for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for security. I let go of my desire for approval. I let go of my desire for control. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. and I open to the love and presence of God and the healing action and grace within. Amen. Man, I love, when you said Keating the first time, with the app, I was like, I wonder if, and then when you brought it up, I just love that. Well, Pastor Ken, thank you. What a gift this was. This is our first time really ever interacting. I feel like I've started listening to you out of a friend, but I had read your work, but hadn't heard you. And over the last few months, I've been really, really looking forward to this time to sit and hear and learn. And man, you've been a real gift. Where can people find you? Obviously, I already mentioned 10th.ca to learn more about your church and hear your messages. But are there other places that people can find the good work that you are creating for the kingdom and beyond?
So our website, 10th, that's spelled out. So Tango Echo November, Tango Hotel, Charlie Alpha, as you mentioned, that's for Canada. Yeah. And then people can contact me. My contact information is there on the website. And then I am on Twitter. And so people can message me there if they want to. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much for just taking the time and just being the leader that you are and the pastor that you are. And thanks for the ways that your steadfastness, your faithfulness, and the ways that it's just so evident to see just that butterfly, that like who you've become through that resurrection, sanctification, and beauty of the Spirit at work in you and through you. So much love, man. Grace and peace. And thank you for this time.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure connecting with you.
Well, thanks so much for tuning into the Craft and Character podcast. I'm so excited because we've got an amazing cohort that's launching in the month of August, the one and only Nancy Beach. It's for women and men. We believe that we are better together. We've got an incredible faculty, Herbert Cooper, Megan Fate Marshman, myself, Nancy Beach. We're going to walk with you for a year. I think there's only a couple spots remaining. Go to theascentleader.com, sign up. And also, you got to check out Preaching Today. They have sermon illustrations that help you. It's an amazing website, and it's really more than just a website. It's a community that wants to help you, kind of inspire you, make an idea come alive, whether through exegesis or sermon illustrations, or just some articles that people are writing for your soul, to preach and speak to your heart and your mind. It's an amazing member community. Thousands upon thousands of people are a part of it. I'd love to help you join. You can go to orderptnow.com/CC30 and you'll get 30% off the monthly rate. It's an amazing opportunity. And then Food for the Hungry. I'm super excited. I'm going out to the DR, the Dominican Republic. I want to see it firsthand because I just keep hearing stories after stories after stories about the amazing work that they're doing. And if you're curious, you want to go on a trip or you're curious about the work that they do, please reach out, steve@steveryancarter.com. But with that said, friends, I hope that you will have a blessed week and take one concept, one idea from Pastor Ken, and may you put it into practice to serve and love your congregation well. Much love, everyone. See you soon. Grace and peace.